This, about 2 years ago, I started writing short articles, 1- and 2-page articles for the Lincoln Eagle. And if any of you get copies of the Lincoln Eagle, every month they have a story by me. I've now written, well, there are 30 stories in here, 32 or 33 stories in here, all that had been published in the Lincoln Eagle. This time I went to a regular publisher, the Rance Publishing Company, and they did I think it's a beautiful job. It looks nice. I'm not sure that I would pay what they charge. They want $16 for this. I don't really think it's worth it, but it's, I don't have any copies for sale myself. I have 2 copies here. Both of these are promised. I'm giving one to Paul and I'm giving one to Tom. But that's all I have. I have one more. Again, I didn't give any copies to the Old Dutch Church this time, but I instructed my publisher that if there are any royalties due me, they had to send the royalties to the Old Dutch Church. I am not a member of the Old Dutch Church, don't get me wrong. It is no religious matter with me. If anything, I support St. Joseph's Church. But the Old Dutch Church helped me with information at the time that I was looking for information to provide to people. So the Old Dutch Church helped me. I figured I would help them. That's that. Let's talk about Tom Chambers. I don't know much more about Tom Chambers than you people do. I'm sure that there are some of you here who are more knowledgeable about Tom Chambers than I am. And I'm sure you've all read the same stuff I've read. I'm going to the same sources you are using. And that's about my only source. So let's talk about him. From what I know about Tom Chambers, he was born around 1620. Some say 1621. I don't care, 1620, 1621. Doesn't matter. He was born about that time. They tell us he was a tall, red-haired Englishman. Some writers have said he may be Irish. I don't know about you. Me? I think if he was red-haired, he was Irish. I don't think he was English. But I'm not going to quibble about it. English, Irish, I guess maybe at times the Irish were English too, weren't they? I think they were. At any rate, he came here, and the first real record we have of Thomas Chambers was his signing a contract to build a home, and the name escapes me for a minute. I can get it right here. I got it somewhere. Shepmos was the last name, I know that. Anybody interested in the first name? He did actually build the house. Jan Jansen Shepmos. And in 1642, the deed was signed, not the deed, the contract was signed on May 6, 1642. You going to hold me to that? I don't care. Thomas Chambers signed a contract on May 6, 1642 to build a house for Jan Jansen Shepmos. The building price was $46.40. There you are, there's something. How many of you had that? I think I found it. So that was 1642. That's the first we heard of Tom Chambers. Then he did build the house. Let's get that. He built the house, and it took him maybe 3 or 4 months to build the house. So in 1642, he's wandering about Manhattan, and we don't hear about him until 1646. In 1646, he signed a deed with Rensselearville. On September 7, 1646, he signed the deed. Now, if he was born in 1620, 1646, he's 26 years of age. 1642, he was in Manhattan. So 4 years later, he's gone up to Fort Orange. He's in Albany area. 26-year-old man. We read in Alf Evers. Alf Evers, by the way, I think has written quite a bit about Thomas Chambers. Ralph Evers seemed to imply that Tom Chambers was a kind of a wild person, and I believe he was. He was 26 years old. Everybody his age, they were all drinking beer, they were all drinking wine, and why wouldn't he? He had a friend, Chris Davids, and I'm sure they did a lot of drinking together. From what I hear, they were involved in several fights in Albany. But he's a young man. He's not married. Well, not quite yet. I imagine he's still looking at girls at 26. Maybe they were looking at him too. I would hope so. Would be nice. But anyway, he hitched up 1648 is the next time we come across him. And he's getting married in 1648. Married to a special individual. Special for his life. He married the widow of, and I'll get his name correct, Matties Jansen Van Keulen. Matties Jansen Van Keulen died in 1648. Matties Jansen Van Keulen was really of interest to me. I would think he'd be of interest to you too. The Van Keulens were fairly wealthy in Holland. They came from a city called Koln, K-O-L-N. It was a German city when it was spelled K-O-L-N. When it was a French city, it was spelled Cologne. You've heard of Cologne? You've heard of Koln, K-O-L-N. Are there any Germans in the area here? The O had what's called an umlaut. Anybody? Nobody knows an umlaut? Nobody knows. The umlaut is 2 dots over the O. If you've studied German, you know that changes the pronunciation of the O. It's no longer an O, it's like O-E-R. So Köln would be K-O-E-R-L-N. So when Matties came to Albany, he told them his name was Keulen. And the name was spelled K-E-U-L-E-N. So he was known by the name of Keulen in Albany. When he came to Kingston, the name was Keulen, and somebody emphasized the R. So Van Keulen, K-E-U-L-E-N, was the Albany name. Van Kuren, K-E-U-R-E-N, was the name in Kingston. Why is there a difference? Well, I believe in Albany, Albany was largely settled by Huguenots. Huguenots have French in their blood. And the French would call the city Cologne. So the Q would be Keulen. And it came out Keulen in Rensselearwyck. I'm positive it's because of that. In Kingston, mainly a Dutch influence. And the Dutch, I think, emphasized the Kuren. So Van Kuren. So the Van Kuren family in Kingston goes back to the Van Kulens in Albany. Let me go back to Van Kulen, because there's something else about the Van Kulen family that is of interest. The Van Kulens in Holland were a wealthy family. Matthews Jansen Van Kulen. He was born in London. The family had enough money, they traveled around. Matthew was born in London, came back to Cologne in Germany, and when he grew up, he was wealthy enough. He himself, Matthew, the son, was wealthy enough to purchase a directorate in the Dutch West India Company. You all know the Dutch West India Company, right? Yeah. Big outfit. How much money did it take to buy your way into directorate? How many directors were there in the Dutch West India Company? Anybody count them? 5, 10, 15, 16. He was one of 16. Directors in the Dutch West India Company were entitled to purchase a patroon in America. He purchased 15 miles along the Delaware River, established his own patroonship down there, like Rensselearwyck. 15 miles along the Delaware River, Matthew, he was the boss, and he's collecting the patroon, collects from the tenants all the time. They had to give up something like 1/10 of their produce for the year. Plus, they had to pay interest on the property they had. They paid a tax on the property to the patroon. So he was collecting, he was making money. He had money. His patroonship on the Delaware River was called Swannendale. The patroonship of Swannendale.
Where was it on the Delaware?
It was on the Delaware River. I don't know where. Well, it can be found. Let me see. I don't remember the name of the village. It was in the Dutch territory on the Delaware River. So it couldn't have been far up the Delaware. It lasted for a few years, but the Swannendale was overrun by the local Native Americans, and Swannendale disappeared from the map. So Van Kulen came from the Delaware, he came up and he settled in Rensselearwyck. But remember, he had money. Now, he married in Fort Orange, he was married to Margaret Hendricks. Margaret Hendricks was much younger. She was born around 1620, about the same time that Thomas Chambers was born. But she's married to Van Kulen, and Van Kulen was born around 1600. So he's 40 years old, she is 20 years old. They're married, they have 4 children. Annette, born in 1642, Katrin, born in 1644, Matthew, born in 1646, and Jan in 1648. So they have 4 children. In 1648, the father dies. So Margaret is left with all of his money. And it's 1648, and she's living in Rensselearwyck, not far from a suitor, Thomas Chambers, and they were married. The exact date of their marriage, we don't know. But it was in 1648. Matthew is dead, so he's out. So he gained, in one swoop, he gained all of Matthew's money. Not a bad deal for him. He needed the money. He could use the money. He was running a farm in Rensselearwyck and not doing that well. He was running a farm. He was taking employment as a carpenter. And on the side, all of these Dutchmen, they were all trading with the... Do you mind if I sit down? I'm tired. Please. I'll try to speak up. If I'm not successful, holler and I'll stand up again. All of these Dutchmen came here, the Dutch and the English and the French and everybody else that came here. They all came here looking to make money. How were they going to make money? They all thought that there was a big profit to be made by purchasing skins, beaver hides, beaver skins. And I'm sure that wherever they could get hold of these beaver skins, they were going to grab them and they were going to hold on to them and send them back to Holland and make money. I'm sure that it was a dog-eat-dog trade. By the way, this was illegal. Rensselaer didn't want you buying these skins from the Indians because he wanted to buy them. He wanted to make the profit. Well, these settlers were of a mean, if they could, they were buying skins. I imagine that the two Indians that sold the property to Chambers, and the sale did go through, I imagine they were here with beaver skins, trying to sell them. And when they came, they were talking to these settlers in Rensselearwyck, and not many of them were happy. This was not a favorable location for tenants in Rensselearwyck. None of them liked paying out rent on this property. None of them liked paying for every other charge. And the patroon was a dictator within his patroonwyck. He controlled their lives. They were bound to him. They were like servants, like slaves for him, I guess. So I'm sure there was a lot of animosity. So the Indians are there, and they're trying to sell pelts. And these couple Indians that came from Esopus, and the ones that sold their property to Chambers, they came all the way from Esopus, and that's 50 miles away. They traveled up. Now these are Indians. How are they traveling? They're running through the woods. So they're running through the woods carrying a couple beaver pelts in order to trade it for a couple trinkets, or maybe a handful of powder for their guns. I'm sure when these Indians came, they're not only going to talk about selling pelts, they're going to talk about selling some land too. And they did. Tom Chambers, he had money. He was ready to make the purchase. There are some writers have suggested that my mind is, I'm drifting now. What did I?
Purchasing land.
Purchasing
Yeah.
land from the Indians.
I forgot what I was going to say now. That's not the first time that it's happened to me. Anyway, the Indians were there trying to sell pelts, and at the same time they're selling their land. Some writers have suggested that Chambers, at least Chambers, and Chris Davids had visited that land sometime before they bought. I'm inclined to believe it's true. I would imagine they did. Why would you, or why would anyone buy a bunch of land from some Native Americans that you didn't really know? So I'm sure that they had visited here. Certainly Chris Davids had. Chris Davids he visited Indian tribes all over the place. He liked to travel around the country visiting the Indians. So I'm sure that at least he was down looking at the property in Esopus. I'm inclined to think that probably Tom Chambers did also. I don't see why he wouldn't. I'm sure he looked over the property. At any rate, we know that the property at Esopus was extremely fertile. The property, and I've seen this written in a number of locations, the property in Esopus was fertile to about 4 feet in depth. This land around the area here, the farmland around here, had been gathering topsoil year after year after year. With the spring floods, fresh topsoil came down from the Catskill Mountains, built up on top of what was there. By the time the Dutch moved into the area, there was at least 4 foot of topsoil there ready for them. The property that the Indians were selling was completely cleared. Where do you get cleared property? And particularly with topsoil that's 4 foot deep. It was ideal. This was a good bargain for these people. They were ready. They were ready to buy, ready to move. And Chambers did buy. We have the Chambers deed here. I think I gave you a copy of it here. I don't have it in my own. Well, it doesn't matter. 72 here. So 1652 anyway. And we have the Chambers buying the property and Margaret going with him. Chambers, I'm sure you're all familiar with this. Chambers had no children of his own. He married Margaret Hendricks. She had just had 4 children. I told you about them, 1642, 44, 46, and 48. She had 4 children. I don't imagine she was beyond her childbearing years. Chambers, in 1652, all right, if he was born in 1620, he's now 32. Can he still have children? I'm sure he could have, but he didn't. So he and Margaret and 4 children came down to Kingston in 1652. Are we certain of the year? We think it was 1652 is the date on his deed. You have a copy of his deed. I gave you a copy of it somewhere. I don't have it here, but it's in here. I know it is. I did hand out a paper with the deed on it. It doesn't matter. 1650 is, yeah, you all have a copy of it. Now I've got a copy, good. So I can see it too. All right, 1652 he came. It's the date on the deed, and I provided you with an English translation of the deed. If you want to see the original deed, it's here. It's the property of the Senate House. Now, this translation of the deed was provided to me by the Senate House. It's not mine. They provided me a copy, and I made copies for all of you. I just thought you might want to have it amongst your papers. So I just reproduced it. And I also reproduced the second page. In here you have a copy of the Declaration on Foxhall Manor. That comes much later in the story, Tom Chambers. But 1652, we have them settling here. Tom, Margaret, and 4 children. The oldest of the child was a girl, born 1642. Second girl born in 1644, a boy born in 1646, and a boy born in 1648. The oldest child in 1652 was 10 years old. That was a girl, Anechi. The second child one was 10, the other was 8. Boys were 6 and 4. They're not that old. Tom Chambers is left with a lot of property. He has no one to work the property, so he goes back to his Indian friends. He hired Indians in Albany. He hired Indians back in Kingston. I don't imagine that those children would be too keen on doing farm work anyway. At that time, Tom Chambers was a farmer. 1652, they were farmers. They were Dutch farms. He's not Dutch. He's English. He's English, yeah, but he's married to a Dutch woman. He's Dutch. No matter who came into the Esopus area, no matter what their background was, they became Dutch rather quickly. They had to marry. They had to find somebody to marry. Who were they going to marry? There was only Dutch here. We don't find many English people marrying English. We do have an influx of Huguenots. They started coming here in 1662. So that's quite a bit later. Well, anyway, he's here with his 4 stepchildren, Anechi, and Katrin, and Matthew, and Jane. Anechi was the oldest, and perhaps the first one to get married. I have a date of marriage somewhere. Again, I don't know if I'm going to find it that quick. Anechi married in 1667, so it was quite a few years after they got here. But remember, she was only born in 1644. So she married. You'll recognize this guy. She married a soldier. He came from Fort Orange. I'm inclined to think that Anechi knew him up at Fort Orange. His name was Hendrick, by the way. His first name was Hendrick. I'm not telling you the last name yet. I don't want you to guess. I'm going to spring it on you. It's a name you'll recognize. Anyway, Hendrick signed on as a soldier for the Dutch, and he was stationed in the barracks down on the rundown. His last name was Person. Anybody know a Person? Yeah. A lot of Persons here. All of the Person family that later became so well known here, we know the Person house. They all are descendants of Hendrick Person. And Hendrick Person was a soldier in the barracks. That seems kind of strange, doesn't it? Anechi is the daughter-in-law, stepdaughter of Thomas Chambers. He was a bigwig in the Stockade area at that time, 1667. He was an important person. And his stepdaughter is marrying this soldier down there. Well, he wasn't a soldier very long. He became a corporal, and eventually he became in charge of the group of soldiers down there. Corporal of the Guard or whatever he became. But anyway, that took care of Annetchi. The second oldest of that family was Katrin. Again, stepdaughter to Thomas Chambers. Katrin, let's see who she married. I know I've got it here somewhere. All right. Katrin, born in, well, she was the oldest, 1642. She married on October 3rd, 1660. She was the first one married. Again, somebody you all know, every one of you know. I don't have to tell you his name. His name was Jan Jansen Van Amersfoort. Who was Van Amersfoort? Jan Jansen Van Amersfoort. Who was he? Revolutionary War. There was one house was not burned by the British. Van Steenbergen. Changed his name to Van Steenbergen. A proper marriage for a daughter, stepdaughter of Thomas Chambers? I would think so. So that takes care of the two girls. Let's see how the boys did. All right. We got two boys, Matty and Jan. Jan was the oldest. He was born in 1646, and he married September 28, 1667. So, you may not be as familiar with the name of the girl he married. He married Magdalena Blanchard. Anybody know the Blanchard family? You know them! You know them. The Blanchards, very influential family, extremely wealthy. Matthew Blanchard was a horticulturist, a Huguenot, one of the Huguenots that came here. What's the first Huguenot family we all know about? Nobody knows them. Du Bois. You know the Du Boises, right? Du Boises, and how about Anthony Crispell? Brothers and sisters-in-law, aren't they? Well, I'm talking about Jan, married Magdalena Blanchard. She was a sister-in-law to Louis Du Bois, sister-in-law to Antoine Crispell. Wealthy family. Matthew Blanchard, by the way, got in a big argument with Charles DeWitt. But they settled their differences eventually. But these were important families in the early community here. There's one more, Matty's. Oh, I gotta tell you about Matty's. Matty's, born in 1648. He was the youngest of Marguerite. He was the youngest of Marguerite's children. He was born in 1648, and he married Chechi DeWitt. How many of you know anything about the DeWitt family? Money, 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 money. The DeWitts had dough. Take a ride down Hurley Avenue and turn in where you see the sign Sudan Farm. And take a ride down that private lane if they let you in. When you go down that lane, there's a caretaker comes walking out and stops your car as you're going down this, it's a private street, a private road. It's a dirt pad. As you go down there, he comes out and he stops you and says, "Pardon me, what is your business here?" Well, when I went there, I said, "I want to see the DeWitt house, and I want to take a photograph of the DeWitt house." He said, "Wait here, and I will see if I can get you permission to do that." So I waited. And sure enough, he came back a couple of minutes later. He said, "That will be all right, as long as we know what you're going to do." And I drove down, and if you get the chance, go take a look at the DeWitt house. Oh, look at my photographs. You'll find a DeWitt house in there, because I did take a photograph. It's a beautiful stone house. The DeWitt family had plenty of dough. Cherrick DeWitt was a Dutchman. No Englishman in that family. When he came, he bought 100 acres of land from the Indians. And he later bought more and more and more. The DeWitt family, they were prolific, by the way. He had something like 12 or 13 children. The DeWitts are very important in the history of Kingston, too. Later on, you may have read about Charles DeWitt during the American Revolution. You may have heard about Mary DeWitt. She was married to James Clinton, and the mother of DeWitt Clinton. DeWitt family were very influential. That must have been the biggest wedding of the year. Should have been. A Chambers marrying a DeWitt. Chambers' son marrying into the DeWitt family. Must have been a major event. I couldn't find a record of their marriage at the Old Dutch Church. Matter of fact, just for your information, Thomas Chambers did not join the Old Dutch Church until 1692. That's 2 years before he died. He was extremely generous to the Old Dutch Church. Lots of money. He signed up to give, I don't know, $200 a year to the Old Dutch Church for maintenance. For the dominie needed a salary, so he signed up. When it came to build a church, the dominie's house, the minister's house in the Stockade, he was there. He was number one with money. He was a big donor. He gave freely, but he did not join the church. Margaret, his wife, she signed up number one. She was there the first day. She joined the Old Dutch Church. She was a number one member of the church, took part in the First Communion. They celebrated their First Communion, I think it was December 6, 1660. I believe that's the date. I've got it here somewhere. If anybody's interested, I can go through and find out all of these things. I don't have it all at my fingertips, but she was there. And there was something like, I think there was something like 20 or 25 people who joined in at the First Communion service that was served at the Old Dutch Church. Now, 1660, there was not a separate, well, there was a separate church building, but it was not the church that we see there today. For those, I'm sure you all know this, the stockade was built in sections. You're probably familiar with the stockade as it existed in 1677. That was the entire stockade area. 1658 was when they built the first stockade in Kingston. And the first stockade was only 1/4 of the size of the entire stockade area. The first stockade, and don't tell me about streets, there were no streets in there, there was just 4 walls. There was an alleyway they called Dover Street that ran through there. The first stockade ran from Clinton Avenue over to about where Wall Street is today. And it ran from John Street down to North Front. So that's about 1/4 of the size of the eventual stockade. That was 1658. In 1660, that was the size of the stockade. In 1660, Peter Stuyvesant came up and decided that they should build a minister's house, a place where the minister, we had a minister. He decided that there should be a house built where he could, I gotta sit again. Excuse me a minute. they would build a house for the minister, they call it the minister's house. It was also called the community house. It was a community house. The community house was used for church services, was used as a school for the children. The minister lived there, and people who did not have a house anywhere could get a room in the minister's house. Now, some of the books tell us that the minister's house in 1660, was built in 1660, tell us that the minister's house in 1660 was built up on Main Street. Could not be. Stockade did not go beyond John Street. Couldn't be up on Main Street. No way. It had to be inside the stockade. They were not going to let the minister live outside. They're not going to put their children outside. Not when there's Indians all around. And in 1660, they had just gotten over a fight with the Indians. 1659 was the First Esopus War. So they weren't going to send their kids out there. They were not going to send the minister out there. They were not going to send people to live out there. The first church, the first minister's house, had to be inside the 1658 stockade. That's where it was. It was on lot number 4 in the 1661 list of lots. And I'm sure you've seen that in various books. They all have it. I'm sure you've seen it. There's a list of lots in 1661, the first lots, and then the second lots are after 16. But the second lots were constructed after the stockade had extended over to Green Street. So we have the initial stockade. Minister's house had to be inside somewhere, had to be away from the noise, I'm sure. We're not going to put the minister in a church center, children's services, near where the animals go in and out of the gates to get to the fields. The fields are down outside the stockade. The animals were taken out to graze every day. There was a cow herd. There was one lawsuit. I'm sure some of you have seen this. If you've been through the translation of Dutch records, you've seen there was one lawsuit where one of the women complained that the cow herd did not take her cow to pasture in the morning. So she went and complained to the court. And the court very nicely told the lady, get your cow there on time and he will take your cow. So that was, but how did they go? Where did they go out? They went out North Front Street. The western end of North Front Street led to Frog Alley. You all know where Frog Alley is, right? Right down Frog Alley, and they walked across the Esopus Creek. So the minister's house, I claim it had to be on to that what we call John Street today, right where Wall Street exists. Wall Street was not cut through until 1826. Why? Because there was a large stone house right where Wall Street exists on the north side of John Street. And the original minister's house was wood, but that had to be replaced at some time between then and 1679 when the church was built. All right, while I'm talking about the first stockade, Thomas Chambers, when I wrote my first book, I'd seen information telling me that Tom Chambers' house was safe from all sorts of, so I assumed that he never lived inside the stockade. I knew that he had been granted lot number 1 inside the 1658 stockade. I knew that he had lot number 1, but I read this and I assumed that he didn't live there, just owned lot number 1. He lived there. He lived, I told you about Dover Street. Dover Street was this dirt alleyway. It wasn't even a road, it was just an alleyway. But it was a dirt road, dirt. And it ran from the stockade, the southern wall on the stockade, to the northern wall on the stockade. Thomas Chambers built a wooden house on the west side of Dover Street, and he built a brewery on the east side of Dover Street. We don't read much about his brewery. I wonder why. Perhaps it's because everybody had their brewery in those days. They all brewed their own beer. I guess maybe that's why these Dutchmen were all in a fighting mood. They certainly did enough fighting. If you go through these TDR records, and the TDR records, they're more a record of the village happenings. It's not just a court record, although the court records are all in the TDRs. And you'd be amazed at how many court cases arose as a result of fights that broke out between neighbors. Seems like they were fighting with one another all the time. And they fight, and, well, you know how it is. You go to the bar, you have a fight with somebody, the next day you have a beer together. And I imagine they did the same thing. Well, Thomas Chambers owned a brewery there. I imagine he was probably selling some beer, maybe supplying friends with some beer. He didn't own it very long. Around about 1667, along came another prominent, I assume he was English, I don't remember now, Henry Pauling. Does anyone know Henry Pauling? Anyone remember Henry Pauling? Nobody remembers him. It was before my time too, and I've been around a while. Anyway, Thomas Chambers sold his brewery and his house to Henry Pauling. And Henry Pauling grew kind of wealthy too. Any of you know about the town of Pauling on the other side of the river? That was Henry Pauling. You'd be amazed. These people were shrewd. Henry Pauling got to be a very influential person with the Dutch and with the English when they ran the area here. And Henry Pauling had himself elected to the Board of Trustees. And the Board of Trustees, from about 1688 until, I guess it was around 1750, the Board of Trustees for the village of Kingston was also the Board of Trustees for the county of Dutchess. These guys, these trustees here, they all got in on buying land in Dutchess County. Pauling bought 1,000 acres over there, the village of Pauling. He bought it, gave it to one of his kids. So they were pretty shrewd. They were a shrewd bunch. But anyway, that's Henry Pauling. America, another influential, but a good friend of Chambers. Let me get back to Chambers. We came here to talk about Chambers. Chambers, at first, he was not the most influential person in the community. Stoll, and again, a first name, Mrs. There were so many that had the same first name. this one I've got here. I know. Jacob Jansen Stoll. Jacob, well, let me go back a little bit before that. When the first group came down from Fort Orange to settle here, we don't know whether they landed up at Stockade. Some writers say they landed up there and marched up the Esopus Creek. That's a long walk. Some writers say they landed down at Rondout and came up the path, and there's evidence to indicate that that's the way they came, because the Thomas Chambers deed includes a pathway from Rondout up to the property here. So there's evidence to prove that. Again, I'm drifting. Where am I drifting now? Anybody got an idea to set me off? Well, oh, I know what I'm thinking. I'm thinking about Thomas Chambers becoming an influential person in the community. In the first community, Tom Chambers and Christopher Davids were probably the influential people on the trip down. They were both very familiar with the Indians. They both were fluent in conversing with the Indians. They both spoke English. They both spoke Dutch. Tom Chambers, in addition, was familiar with the Dutch court proceedings, and he was familiar with the English court proceedings. He was a valuable man, really. Christopher, oh, what can I put the name of? Chris Davids. Very important as far as getting along with the Indians was concerned. He lived with the Indians. He traded with the Indians. He traded whiskey to the Indians. He ran a trading post down on the Rondout. Why did he have a trading post down there? That's where the Indians were. And it kept him in contact. When he sold his trading post on this side of the Rondout, he moved to the other side of the Rondout to be closer to the Indians again. So he was influential on a trip down here. When they got here, you would imagine that Thomas Chambers was the most influential person. But oddly enough, he wasn't. Why? I think it was because Mr. Stoll, did I give you his name? Jacob Jansen Stoll. Mr. Stoll had the largest house in the community. So every time they entertained Peter Stuyvesant here, Peter Stuyvesant had to have a place to stay. Where did he stay? In the largest home in the community. And Stoll's house was large enough so that whenever the people in the neighborhood wanted to meet for some reason or another, they met at Stoll's house. So I'm inclined to believe Stoll was the most influential person in the area in the first couple of years, from 1652 until roughly 1662. Meanwhile, Thomas Chambers was no slouch. He was a big, strong individual, free with his fists. He was a fighter, and I think everybody knew it. They knew it in Fort Orange up in Albany. In Albany, Thomas Chambers was the captain in charge of the militia at Fort Orange. He was captain in charge of the militia, and lieutenant under Chambers was Hendrik Joachimson. Everybody knows Joachimson, right? Sure you do. Name is Schoonmaker. Change it to Schoonmaker. Joachimson was up in Fort Orange. Meanwhile, these settlers came down here. They are settled here. Thomas Chambers, captain of militia up there, 1659, the first Indian revolt, captain of the militia in 1659, Thomas Chambers. Again, why would they pick him? It's obvious to me. He was the biggest guy in the group. What else do you do? If you get a group together and they want to pick a leader, who do they pick on? And particularly if you think you may have to fight, you get the big guy and put him up front. I'll follow. So, he was up front, up in Albany. Hendrik Joachimson was right behind him, another big guy. But Hendrik Joachimson didn't come down in 1662. He was still up there, still in charge of the militia up in Fort Orange. 1659, the first uprising of the Indians. You all know the story, right? Thomas Chambers gave the Indians liquor, and they got boozed up, and then a couple of them were shot, and they came back and they attacked the there were a few people were killed, and Peter Stuyvesant come up and said, well, we better bring some people down. So they brought a number of soldiers down. One of those soldiers was Person. He came down in 1659. So he came down, and not only that, but they brought Hendrik Joachimson, came down 1659. But he's here in 1659, and placed second in command. He became the lieutenant of the militia here. Thomas Chambers, captain. Hendrik, schoolmaker, was lieutenant in charge. 1659 war is over. We're getting into 1661. 1661, we have the stockade built, and that war is over. Chambers is captain of militia. Who's lieutenant? Joachimson. Hendrik Joachimson, lieutenant in charge. 1661, we have the initial lot owners. Thomas Chambers, lot number 1. I told you where that was located, didn't I? Yeah. Up on John Street and Clinton Avenue, right on the corner there. That was lot number 1. I told you the church was in lot number 4. If we go along John Street, 2, 3, 4, lot number 4 was where the minister's house was. I told you where that was. Wall Street, minister's house. That was the first. They would 12 more lots that were divided in that first stockade. But in 1661, the stockade was extended all the way over to Green Street. And now they're issuing new lots. Lot number 1 in the second group of lots was given to the second command. Hendrik Joachimson. Right? Who knows where Hendrik Joachimson's house was? I don't. Peter Stuyvesant came up with 2 new names, 2 new commissaries. One of them was Thomas Chambers. The other one was a new name for you, Gisbert Van Imborg. I'm sure that name is familiar to some of you. Gisbert Van Imborg, ring a bell? Ring a bell? Anyone?
Person house?
Must, sure. Yes. Gisbert Van Imborg was given, I think it was lot number 13. But I have been able to trace, and I know Gisbert Van Imborg had a wooden house where the Person house is today. That property belonged to Gisbert Van Imborg in 1661. Gisbert Van Imborg was brought to the colony in 1659. At the end of the Indian trouble, he was brought in to take care of those persons who were wounded in 1659. Gisbert was a surgeon in the Dutch army. He was not only a surgeon, but he was a barber. Surgeons did haircuts, right? If you look at again, translation of Dutch records, if you go through them, his last will and testament is included in TDRs. And when you go his last two, you'll come to the same conclusion I did. This man was a storekeeper. He kept a store there because there was something like 8 or 10 pages of close typewritten list of all of the merchandise that he had in his possession. He had something like 4 different suits, 5 new hats and 10 old hats. He had farm equipment and animals and you name it. He had all kinds of things in his inventory. He had to be a storekeeper, and it had to be at that location. So anyway, he was there, and he was appointed to be a commissary along with Thomas Chambers. And the two of them, they were not the only commissaries. I think there were 4 or 5 altogether. And they met approximately once every 2 weeks. And they would just listen to people's complaints and whatever else they had to listen to. But when you go through the records, it's interesting that they seem to attend every single meeting. They didn't seem to miss a meeting. Not only that, frequently this group of whatever the magistrates, frequently they would appoint a committee to adjudicate some matter that wasn't settled in court. And who did they appoint? Thomas Chambers and Gisbert Van Rensselear. The two of them. For 2 years, until Gisbert died, the two of them seemed to be the important people in the community. After Gisbert died, it was Tom Chambers, and he continued as commissary until about 1670. And it was around about 1670, I think 1672, that he was granted the manor. And I think that's interesting. I gave you a copy of you'll find it somewhere, the last sheet of pages that I gave you records the granting of the manor. I don't think there's anything unusual about it, except that when he was appointed in charge of the manor, he was the commissary for the manor from then on. It was his manor. He could buy and sell property. As a matter of fact, there were several transferred of property within the manor that can be found in the translation of Dutch records. Not many. I was purposely looking for them because I know that he had the right to buy and sell property. He had the right to collect. He ran the court inside the manor. He was the judge inside the manor. He was the boss inside the manor. The same way Rensselear was in Rensselearwyck. The same way all of these patroons were. Something else, it's on my mind. The English came in 1664. One of the things they did was to change the title of the patroons from patroons to manors. They were all called manors. And Thomas Chambers was made chief of the manor, and in that way placed on equal with the patroons who had bought all of that land on the other side of the river. So he was a very influential man. Money, he had our money. we don't hear much about Margaret, other than she died about 1681, I guess it was. She continued to be influential in the Old Dutch Church. And he continued to support the Old Dutch Church with finances. But like I told you, never joined the Old Dutch Church until 1692. What else can I tell you? Oh! He was not only remunerated with her marriage, but after Margaret died, he did not remain a bachelor very long. He found another widow, Laurentia Van Gospeak. Again, the Van Gospeak name is familiar. You've seen it at the Senate House, right? Van Gospeak name at the Senate House. The same Laurentia Van Gospeak that married Thomas Chambers. After Chambers died, she remarried. Yeah. And that's how the Van Gospeaks got into the Senate House. Laurentia Van Gospeak, was the widow of Laurentius Van Gospeak, who for 1 year was dominee at the Old Dutch Church. He was pastor at the Old Dutch Church. Blom, the original pastor at the Old Dutch Church, after his wife Anna passed away, he retired. And they initiated a search to find a replacement for Dominic Blom, and they came up with Laurentius Van Gospeak. Van Gospeak was quite an interesting character. I'm talking about everybody but, well, again, he was an interesting. He was a doctor. He had finished his studies and was a physician in Holland when he studied for the ministry. And when he was accepted to the ministry, he was recommended to become the next dominee for the Old Dutch Church here in Kingston. You never guess who recommended. Well, I don't even know, come to think of it. Well, anyway, he was recommended, and he became the second minister at the Old Dutch Church. Influential kind of person, a physician and a dominee. One of the first things he did was to run around through the community, and by now most of these Dutchmen were getting to be pretty old people, so we don't hear much about them anymore. And Chambers was doing his thing up in his manor, so we don't hear much about him either. Van Gospeak signed up a number of new members for the Old Dutch Church, and he built the first stone church in 1679, built the first stone church that existed at the intersection of Main and Wall Street. Remember, Wall Street was not yet cut through, because this is not yet 1800. It's only 1679. And Wall Street wasn't cut through to North Front until 1825, 26, 27, something like that. When was it? 1827?
27.
Roundabout, yeah. All right. What else can they tell you?
Well, I thought that the Wall Street wasn't built from John Street to North Front until 1820.
Right.
But it was built.
It was built above that.
But it was built from Main Street to John.
It was built from Main Street up to John, yes.
Yeah.
At the time the stockade was extended, which brings us to around 1677, when the stockade was extended south to Main Street. at that time, well, that was just in time for 1679 when the old Dutch church was built there. There was something else I was going to tell you. Oh, I may as well get into this. I don't know whether I want to. All right. The Fred Johnston House. You know where the property of the Fred Johnston House is? Well, in 1677, that property extended all the way down to where the courthouse's property ends. And in 1677, that property was owned by Elias Hasbrook. And on Elias Hasbrook's deed, there is a reference to a wall that existed between the Hasbrook property and the courthouse property. Apparently there was a wall there at the time of the Hasbrook deed, which is 1677. So that goes back quite a ways. Now, whether that was an earlier wall to the stockade or a wall that went parallel to Wall Street, I don't know. And I don't think anyone else does. But it's present, that information is present on the deed, and somebody else may want to do some research on that. That's Elias Hasbrook lived in a stone house where the Fred Johnston House is today, until the Revolutionary War. During the Revolutionary War, Elias Hasbrook joined General Washington's army. He was a colonel in the Continental Army, and he traveled with Washington. And he didn't come back until around 1783. When he came back, there was nothing left of his house. His house had been burned in 1677 during the Revolution. 1777. So he came back to a piece of vacant property. And he wasn't going to build there himself. He left anybody from the Woodstock area. He bought property up there. He eventually became the first supervisor in the town of Woodstock. Elias Hasbrook came from here at the end of the Revolutionary War, went up there. I don't know that I can tell you anything more about Thomas Chambers. Yes, go ahead.
I have a question for you,
Go ahead.
if you don't mind. So when Chambers came down in 1652,
Yes.
before the stockade and before the division of the streets, where would he and those original settlers have built their...
All right. The first settlers, and in the first paragraph I tell you where they were. They came and they settled on land that they had purchased from the Native Americans. They all purchased land from the Native Americans while they were living up in Canada. We don't know whether they came here in 1652 or 1653, but we assume 1650. That is the date that's on Thomas Chambers' deed. We know they came here. I would think that they probably came here in 1652, probably lived in tents or lean-to on the property that they had purchased. And they had each purchased 10, 20, 40. Chambers bought something like 70 acres, I believe it was. Chambers' property at that time, the property that he owned.
But they were on the bank of the Esopus, that's where they built those houses.
Yeah.
So we're mad.
His property ran from where the Esopus Creek is today. From the location where the Esopus Creek turns from going in an easterly direction to going in a northerly direction. Do you know where the bend is? So the bend is. That's where Chambers' property was.
So that was around Manor Avenue.
Yeah,
The
that area.
lowlands by where the Kingston Plaza is now.
By the way, If you're interested, oh, I can't think of the name of him now. Wrote the book Kingston, comes from Woodstock.
Al Evers.
Al Evers, yeah. Al Evers' book, Kingston. If you're interested, about page, before page 400, 300 and some odd or something, he has a photograph of a sketch of the Thomas Chambers house. We don't have a picture of Thomas Chambers' house, his manor house. But there was a sketch prepared at some time. Somebody, Van Leuven, the name was? Is Tom here? Do you know about this sketch? It's supposed to be in your control here. You don't know, you haven't heard of it. We should have Dina here, I'll bet she knows where it is. There was supposed to be a sketch, and it's supposed to be here at the Senate House. A copy of that sketch is in the Alf Evers book. And if you get hold of his book, and there are a lot of them around, I'm sure you can find it in the library, you can see a picture. What Van Leuven says was his manor house. There's no other copy of it that we know of. I don't even know that anybody knows exactly where the house was. Somewhere in the vicinity of Manor Avenue. I don't know exactly where it was. Yes?
What was the effect of the English takeover 64 through 66? And
Very interesting.
What role, if any, did Chambers play in that?
If anything, his control in the area, his influence in the area was increased. He's English. He speaks English. He reads and writes English, Dutch. He speaks the Indian language. This man was a very valuable person. All of a sudden, the English come and they conquer. There was no conquest here. The English ships sailed into the harbor in New York City. They sailed up and they sent the message to Peter Stuyvesant, "We are here." And he said, "Welcome, brother." Practically. That's not exactly what he said, but I think you get the idea. At first he wanted to fight them. But the burghers, you all know what a burgher is? Go to McDonald's. The burghers were the influential business people in town. The burghers told Peter Stuyvesant, "You're not gonna fight. Look at them, there's 4 ships there. They got 600 soldiers there. What do we got? We got nothing." They didn't even have a fort. They had an earthworks there that they called Fort Stuyvesant, I think, or Fort something. I forget what they called it, Fort Netherlands. Doesn't matter. It was only a dirt bulwark there. And they had a couple cannon. And they were not going to stand up against these British ships. So the English came in 1664. They said, "This is ours." And Peter Stuyvesant says, "Oh, I'm retired." By the way, Peter Stuyvesant settled on his Bowery. And if you're interested, his body is said to rest within, I think it's a little church on the Bowery. It's down at 10th Street and 2nd Avenue in Manhattan. I worked there, I know. I was in there. His body is supposed to lie inside there. I guess they have a crypt, and I guess he is. But that's where his farm was, his Bowery. Bowery is a farm. And that's where Peter Stuyvesant's Bowery was. He settled on his farm. He was done. The English came and they took over. They then sailed up the Hudson River, and they went past Kingston first. They went past Esopus. At that time it was called Wiltwyck. They went past here and went up to Fort Orange. Fort Orange was a larger village than Kingston at the time. So the English went to Fort Orange first. they knew if they got a capitulation at Fort Orange, Wiltwyck was not going to argue with them. And it turned out that Fort Orange didn't argue with them. They went up there with their ships and they said, "We are here." And they said, "Yeah, welcome here, have fun." And they came down and they said the same thing here. There were repercussions in Wiltwyck, though. The English came here, and the English governor installed a military group here. We already had Thomas Chambers in charge of the militia, but the English came along and they left some English soldiers here. A Captain Brodhead, Daniel Brodhead, put in charge. And the governor said, "Hey, you're here, you're going to maintain order here, but treat these people decently. They're decent people. Treat them decently. Let them live according to their Dutch ways. Let the Indians live according to the Indians' ways." And he said, "All right." And the governor went back down to New York City because that's where they governed from down there. Daniel Brodhead governed from here. And he governed with a fist. He ran into opposition. He went to some of these neighbors around here. Louis Du Bois had a brewery. Went to Louis Du Bois and said, "I'll have a beer." And he wanted to exert his executive privilege. Louis Du Bois wasn't going to have anything like that. And his wife she stood right up and she said, "Hell no. Put the money here." She was a Dutch woman. Daniel Brodhead said, "Off with you, lady." He slapped a couple of them in jail. And they actually had a mutiny here in 1667. All over Daniel Brodhead and the military group that was the English soldiers that were left here. Eventually, we had a new English governor, Governor Lovelace, was assigned here. And he came and he made peace. It's interesting because he conducted an investigation. He sent a committee up here to investigate into the circumstances. And he told the committee, "You will investigate the circumstances, and then you will find that so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so are guilty of treason against the English government." And they picked out some of them who were loudmouth. Trying to think of his name, the real loudmouth. It'll come to me, I know it will. Big in the Dutch church here, too. You know who I'm talking about. Why can't I remember this
Treason
name?
was a capital offense, though. Did they execute it?
Yeah. They were, these 4 or 5 people, the court of inquiry decided that they would be banned from the community. That was their decision. And they were banned. But a couple of weeks later, all was forgiven. They came back. They were back. And they were back in business. The one thing that did happen that was good, Governor Lovelace disbanded the English army group then. They were relieved of their duty, and they were settled into a new community, Marbletown. They formed Marbletown, and Marbletown was formed with the military detachment. One time I tried to see if I could put together the names of all of the soldiers in the English, but I never finished the job, so I can't give you that. I wish I did, but I didn't. There's so many things to be done, and and I wish I had. I'd love to spend more time over in the county clerk's office. Somebody should get over there. The translation of Dutch records, and not only that, the trustee records. There are 8 more books of trustee records over there. Trustees were formed in 1687. And the trustees took over property management for the entire town of Wiltwyck, was then Kingston, the village of Kingston. And the trustees after that were the ones that managed deeds and the property records. But I spent about 3 months working there, but that was 2 or 3 years ago. I'm not going back. I can't do it. I just can't. I can't stand long enough to do the work. And trustee records and early deeds, a lot of them are contained in trustee book, record book AA and BB and CC and DD, and they're way on the top shelf. You got to climb up a ladder about 5 steps in order to reach the books and bring them down. Right, Ed? You've done it.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Well, maybe someone in this group tonight will carry that on.
I wish him luck. I'd love to see some young person that's willing to.
Maybe I'll try and
It's a
try
job.
my hand on it. Does
If
anyone have
if anyone
further
wants to
questions?
start,
Okay, I apologize. Ted, we thank you very much for the presentation.
I know you're all interested, that's why you're here. So I hope I provided some information
This
for
was
you.
wonderful. It's beyond Thomas Chambers. We got to learn a lot about the earlier settlers and a lot about the early part of Kingston, which is what this lecture series is about. And I want to thank everybody for coming here, and I hope you'll continue to come. This is Kingston's Buried Treasures. This is going to be a monthly lecture series. Couldn't be better to start this out with Thomas Chambers, who's considered the first settler of Kingston. As we know, there were others with him, but next month, for September, the subject of that is going to be General George Sharp, who was a Civil War hero. He was the leader of the Ulster 120th Regiment, which is one of the most storied regiments of the Civil War. In fact, many believe that were it not for them, the Union Army might have lost the Battle of Gettysburg on the second day. He went on to become the principal advisor for Ulysses S. Grant, so he is going to be the subject of our next...
What's the date on that?
That is September... It's the 3rd Friday of the month. I'm thinking September 19th, and we'll send out press releases for that as well. But every month it's going to be the 3rd Friday of the month, beginning at 5:30 right here in the Vanderlyn Gallery here. For October, the 3rd Friday in October, the subject is going to be Alton Parker, who is an Ulster County attorney, judge, Chief Judge of the New York State Court of Appeals in Albany, which is the highest court in New York, and the 1904 presidential candidate for the United States of America. So,
Paul,
yes,
I was
John.
just going to say for information, folks, it's September 21st is the next, and the one in October will be October 19th on the Alton Park.
Very good.
So again, we want to thank everybody. We're also open to suggestions. If there's anybody that you want to hear, you can contact myself. My name is Paul O'Neill. I'm in the Commissioner Juror's office at the courthouse. You can always find me over there. Ed Ford, who's our Kingston City historian. Ann Gordon had to leave, who's the Ulster County historian. Tom is our Kingston City Council member, Tom Haffey. He's the alderman. This is his ward, so you can contact him. And also Pat Murphy from the Friends of Historic Kingston. But again, Ted, thank you so much.
Thank you for
Thank you
inviting
so
me,
much.
Paul.
I want to thank Tom Kernan from the Senate House and Dina Preston. They're the ones who allowed us to come here. They set everything up. As everybody probably knows, the Senate House was supposed to be closed long ago. They remained open for us. And before you leave, they did put out, the Chamber's deed is right up here. This is the actual Chamber's deed from 1652 that started everything. So please take a look. The tombs, there's a picture of the tombstone. It was supposed to be here, but unfortunately, it's in the second floor of the actual Senate House, and it was apparently way too heavy for them to log down to. But there are pictures, and you can see it at the Senate House. So again, thank you, everybody. We hope to see you. And Ted, thank you.
Thank you.